Hello and welcome back to the podcast. It's so good to be here with you today. I'm Jenna, your host, and we're doing an audio-only episode today because I'm back in the cozy zone. I just got home from a big trip to Hawaii and I'm feeling cozy. We're staying off video, and I thought we would just chat this way today. But this trip was a solo journey. I went to Maui and Kauai, and I did a lot of potent full moon work on Kauai. And because I was alone, I spent a lot of time in reflection, and I started thinking about some of the experiences I've had on this supernatural journey of transforming, of learning how to operate in supernatural states. And I've always been fascinated by the science of spirituality. And I thought today we might discuss the science of spirituality a bit and do some bridging between some scientific concepts that have been proven out in spiritual concepts and in spiritual practice, and something that I have personally experienced. So I want to talk a little bit about the way in which light functions, the way in which light is both a wave and a particle. And I want to talk a little bit about the double slit experiment. I'm not going to explain every little detail about this. I'm not the foremost expert in these things and in the scientific explanation of these things. I'm going to link below to a couple of YouTube videos, articles that you can check out that will explain this in more detail for you if you're interested. But I want to connect the dots back to spiritual concepts and from some of my own personal experience, exploring supernatural states of consciousness, exploring how we as humans can operate in supernatural states and how that relates to the findings of this double slit experiment. So in the 1800s, a scientist named Thomas Young wanted to do an experiment to understand a little more about how light behaved. And scientists up until that point thought that light was just all particles. And so the scientists developed the double slit experiment by getting a sheet of metal and creating two slits in it, and then passing light through those slits onto another piece of paper behind that metal. And you would expect that as a wavelength of light goes through the slit, it would create a pattern on the paper behind that sheet of metal that is in the same shape as the slit. That would be the expected behavior. Now, when this happened, when a wavelength of light went through one slit, that was the case. There was a pattern created, and this starts to tell us a little bit more about the patterns that light creates in our universe. It might give us a little hunch there. But when this experiment was done with two wavelengths of light going through those slits, they did not replicate the shape of those slits exactly. It showed some sort of interference pattern, meaning that those two wavelengths of light were interfering with each other, which starts to tell us a little bit about quantum entanglement and the nature of interconnectedness in our reality and the way in which energies affect each other. So we can start to understand this interference that happened between the two light waves as representative of the energetic connections between all things in our universe. Now, as this experiment continued over the years, it is continuing to this day, it was also found that the simple act of observation changes the way the light acts. So when the light waves are being observed, they act like particles. When they are not being observed, they act like waves. So the double slit experiment showed a couple of things. It showed that light both acts as particles and waves. Light is both the particle and wave state, and that the act of observing light changes how the particles act. The simple act of observing light collapses the particles into one reality. Essentially, we are looking at an experiment that proves the nature of quantum reality and the way light operates. So by the light passing through these slits unobserved, it makes a certain pattern. By watching the light pass through these slits, it changes the way the light acts. And this starts to get into the superposition theory in quantum physics, the idea that all realities exist at once, all realities exist as one until there is an observation, until there is a directed outcome by consciousness. That's how I think of this. So you can think of the wave state as spirit and the particle state as matter, right? So we are both spirit and matter. And by thinking of these experiments in spiritual terms, it helps us get our arms around it and really understand how that applies to us in human life. And I've been doing a lot of my own experimentation in this regard, really understanding like how do we as human beings operate in the wave state to affect the particle state, right? So we now know, this experiment being one of the things that proves it, that all of our physical reality, everything that is physical about our experience emanates from the invisible. So the particles come from the wave. The wave is the particle. The way in which we operate or use our consciousness in the wave state affects the particle state. And so we as humans can learn how to operate in the wave state. We can learn how to use our mind to get back into a state of oneness. And for those who may have found some manifestation teachings or been curious about that, there's a lot of discussion around getting your mind into a really still, quiet space, because that's where we can access the quantum field. That's where we can access the wave state of reality. We can't do that when we are in this state of separation, in this state of particle matter, right? So we have to use our consciousness to step out of that state of matter and enter the state of spirit or wave to then have a meaningful effect on the physical, or to have a more profound effect on the physical. And there's a number of ways we do this. We do this through meditation. That's a basic way. And anyone can do it. Anyone can get into the wave state. Some people are able to operate in that wave state in a more powerful way, in a more continuous way, I guess I should say. So, most of the time when we're in meditation, we might be dipping into the wave state. We're just dipping our toe in and out, right? We're not holding that true state of oneness. So when you hear, spiritual teachers talk about unity consciousness, when you hear in, yogic practice, this idea of returning to a oneness state of consciousness, which I'll talk about some of my own personal experience here in a few moments. When you hear about that, that is the act of entering the wave state. When we are in oneness, we are in the wave state, and we can more easily affect very quick physical changes. And there are some humans who have demonstrated instantaneous manifestation. That is because they are operating more fully in that wave state at all times, while also being in the particle state. And that's a paradox right there, that we can be both. And not all humans are going to experience or really have a conscious experience of being both. And not all humans are going to be able to shift their system into the state it needs to be able to fluidly operate between that wave and particle state in a highly conscious way. A lot of the great masters and saints, yogis have been able to demonstrate this. That's why we do these certain spiritual practices, which I've been talking about on the pod and at Star Family Wisdom. These practices help us get out of the particle state and back into the wave state. They help us get back into that pure state of spirit, because when we're back in that pure state of spirit, then we are going to have, again, that more powerful impact on physical reality. And, I'd been experimenting with this for years already, just in my own spiritual practice and ceremonies and quantum journeying, shamanic journeying, learning how to use my consciousness to enter that state of spirit, to understand what is affecting the particle state, like why is the particle state, the physical reality, the way it is, and how can we operate in that spirit state, in that wave state, to make some changes to physical reality. A lot of people are experimenting with that, but how can we take it to the next level? Well, through all of the yogic work I've been doing, I shared a little bit about this on a previous podcast episode. I've now had the experience of entering that state of oneness and holding it fairly continuously. I'm going back and forth still, but I'm having more and more and more time in that wave state, in that state of oneness. And I shared in one episode about an experience, and this has continued to prove out as time is going on, that at times my body can interact with fire without being harmed physically. That is because in that moment, I'm in a wave state. I am the fire. I am one with all things. I am in a wave state and I am passing through the fire. So my hand can pass through the fire without getting burned, because by doing all the work that has happened to achieve that state of oneness, I'm now back in the wave state. And so this is a real life example of how the findings of this experiment kind of play out in our spiritual practice and how we can operate in our quantum reality, and even just understanding the nature of our quantum reality and how these things are possible. And so this is also how, we can tap into different timelines and different possibilities. I talk a lot about this in some of the shamanic tools that I've offered at Star Family Wisdom, and in some of the shamanic practice I've done. This idea of using our consciousness to tap into different timelines that exist. And this is kind of getting into string theory, right? Like we're tapping into different vibrations, different strings of reality that exist. You can think of the timelines almost, as being attached to these different vibratory levels of reality. And so we might currently be operating at one particular vibratory level of reality, one particular frequency. And so our future, all of the future physical manifestation of physical reality and the experiences we will have are attached to that vibratory state. And we're attached to a timeline because of that particular vibratory state. We can, when we're connected with spirit, when we're in an altered state of consciousness, when we learn how to move into the wave state, we can start to connect with different vibratory states. We can start to connect with different timelines, different information, and we can start to, in a sense, collapse the previous timelines that we've been attached to and align ourselves with a new timeline. This is getting somewhat advanced here, but this is an example of how we can use the findings of these quantum physics experiments to prove the very nature of some of these spiritual practices, like how they affect us, how we can think of our spiritual practice as part of this understanding of quantum reality. that spirit in and of itself is quantum. And we actually did a podcast episode a while back called The Quantum Teachings of Jesus. And Eric Rankin, who wrote the book As Above, So Below, came on and talked about some of the geometrical structure of reality, the way in which light organizes itself in geometric patterns in physical reality, and how we can understand those physical patterns to understand the harmony of the universe and the intended harmony that the light of source is meant to come into in physical form. And that concept of as above, so below. So as above being the wave state, so below being the particle state. So, what we think, what we feel, that is essentially happening, in a wave state to some degree and affecting the particle state. So we want to, be able to connect these dots for our own consciousness to have this better understanding of working in the invisible realms, working with light to affect how light shows up in physical reality. And I just love the idea that, this experiment proves that all things exist at once. All possibilities exist. This essentially proves that we live in a universe of unlimited possibility, of limitless possibility, that there are limitless ways light can come into the physical form. And there are, it appears, ways that light can create patterns that are of the highest harmony and highest balance and highest order. And so I also like to think of, these patterns that light creates as these, orders of divine expression. We have all of these different vibratory levels at which light is creating different patterns. And we have all these different vibratory levels, these different strings in which, light is operating somewhat differently. And so we can think of that as the light spectrum, right? That we have this whole spectrum of light that we can play with. And you can think of like the rainbow as the light spectrum, right? But that's the visible light spectrum. There's a whole light spectrum beyond what the human eye can even perceive currently. Humans can develop higher perceptual abilities, which I've also experienced, this idea of starting to see beyond the quote unquote normal light spectrum that humans see, to see into that wider spectrum that does exist beyond our current dimensional experience here on Earth. And so when we start to connect these dots between quantum physics and spirituality, it not only corroborates what we're doing in spirituality and in spiritual practice, but it just gives us this greater framework to operate within. And it helps us, almost see like the universe is like this sandbox we can play in. And I think ultimately that's what it was intended to be, here on Earth at one of the lowest vibratory levels we can be in physical reality, in a sentient, intelligent form. We're not experiencing the full potential of that sandbox. We're just learning about these higher vibratory levels we can operate at. We're just learning about these higher orders and higher patterns of light that can be brought into the physical. And we're just learning about light in general. We're just learning about the interconnected nature of light and spirit, the oneness of all things, and how we can, get our human systems back into that more coherent state where we can experience the oneness of all things, where we can more effectively operate in a wave state and simultaneously be affecting the particle state. And so we've got this huge spectrum we can play within. And my understanding is that lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, we are slowly but surely working our way up this spectrum. And I want to talk about that a little more in a separate episode, just the concept of incarnation, how souls move through the universe, how we go through these different layers of reality. And maybe we'll talk about that more from a spiritual perspective rather than a physics perspective, because the physics terms just get a little confusing, let's be honest. Scientists have been, they're so left-brained, right? It's like so not always that intuitive to, connect the dots on. I think in some ways we've gotten our science a little convoluted, but we're working it out. We're figuring it out. And I think, these sorts of bridging conversations help us do that. They help us take these maybe really complex concepts and simplify them in a way where we can just understand how that is part of our daily reality, how that is part of our life, how that is part of our experience of existence, and why that even is meaningful to us. So I've been thinking a lot about, operating in the wave state, because I've really now connected the dots on what that's like. And again, the different levels we're operating at as humans in regards to even being aware of that, being able to operate in the wave state effectively. And you can, again, think of the particle state as the state of separation, right? Physical reality is designed to give us the experience of separation. It's not a bad thing. It's for a purpose. It's a good thing, right? Like we learn lessons, we grow, we have this really interesting energetic exchange with others, and we ultimately get to learn whether we want to stay in a state of maybe more extreme separation, or do we want to come back into a state of more oneness and unity with each other. And then, there is the potential to operate at a really high level of being so in that oneness that your particles are no longer even affected in the same way in physical reality. Maybe I'm not explaining that perfectly, but we've got people, and myself included, who are, demonstrating these ways of interacting with physical reality that defy what we have assumed was normal. And that's because we actually are living in this quantum reality that ultimately is a holographic projection from spirit. So you can, again, think of the particle state as a projection of the wave state being spirit. And everything in physical reality is being projected from spirit. Even though this feels very real, it is a holographic projection. And maybe to go back to some spiritual terms for a moment, to connect some dots there, in shamanic cultures, many shamans talk about this physical reality being the dream. And for anyone who's been connected to spiritual communities for a while, or who has explored various consciousness practices, you might be familiar with lucid dreaming practices, and how a lot of humans are really fascinated by becoming lucid in their sleep state, in their dream state, and being able to navigate that state in a more conscious way. And as I've been reflecting on all of this, I have found it funny because I think we've got it backwards. Humans are so fascinated about this idea of lucid dreaming in their sleep state. We want to get lucid in this waking state. This is actually the dream. So, I think the shamans had it right that this physical reality that feels so real to us is actually the dream. And we want to be able to wake up in this dream. We want to be able to wake up so much in this dream that we both recognize the separation, the particle state, and the state of oneness and the wave state of spirit. We want to wake up so much in this dream that we can access information that exists in spirit. We want to wake up so much that we can access all of those infinite potentials that exist and become conscious of them so that we can bring them into the physical. We want to wake up so much that we are able to remember the other experiences our soul has had in this particle state. And then we can wake up so much that we no longer even feel as though we are an individual particle or a conglomeration of particles, but that we are truly one with everything. And so there are like all these different layers of awakening that can happen in this dream. And we want to become so lucid in this dream that we're able to operate completely as the wave and particle state at the same time in a highly conscious way. That's like our ultimate goal as spiritual beings. And as we go through this process of spiritual growth and evolution and learning how to operate in these different states of consciousness and just going through our own awakening process, our own remembering process, we then are starting to have the opportunity to move up that vibratory scale and have higher vibratory experiences. We are able to slowly step out of that state of separation and have a different experience of reality. And when we become so lucid in this dream, we get to change this dream. We get to affect this dream in a really profound way. And that's the difference between being, somewhat unconscious of how we're operating, unconscious of why things are happening in physical reality, just kind of moving through life in a sleep, quote unquote, sleep state versus moving through life in a highly conscious, awake state. We want to be so awake in this dream that we are highly aware of why certain things are happening when they're happening. We want to be highly aware of how we can affect physical reality. We want to be highly aware of how every action, thought, and feeling is affecting physical reality. And we ultimately can get into that supernatural quantum state where all exists simultaneously, and we are truly in that oneness. And that's when incredible, miraculous things and miraculous manifestation can happen, because we have become it all. We are not one or the other, and our consciousness has returned to that state. And then that affects, the physical body and how we experience reality. So I've been just thinking a lot about this, and I thought maybe talking it out today with you would be helpful for you, would help connect some dots, and just again help us in that bridging process. Because I think that this idea of bridging science and spirituality is also part of our return to oneness and part of our understanding of how to reach those higher vibratory states. Quantum physics has not been able to explain it all perfectly. And spiritual concepts alone have not been able to explain it all perfectly. And by it all, I mean how the all that is operates, how this universe completely operates, how this universe is designed to support our experience of physical reality. And we've got to put those pieces of the puzzle together to truly be able to have a lucid dreaming experience in our physical lives. And so I've been, having this experience of becoming more and more and more lucid in this dream, and it is wild. It is awesome. And it takes a lot of practice to even be able to operate, in that quantum superpositioned, state, essentially. It is, it's not something that is, it hasn't really been intended for that to be the human experience. Humans have been having this experience of separation for a reason, but we're also on this evolutionary path to potentially getting to a point where we understand superpositioning better and we can understand how to operate in that way better. And that ultimately leads us into becoming a galactic civilization when we can do that. And so there are, ways to understand these things scientifically. There's ways to understand them spiritually. And then when we put them together, I think it just helps, bring the whole puzzle together. So I'll link again below to some of the articles that explain the double slit experiment in more detail. I probably didn't do the best job explaining it because, again, I'm bridging here. I'm not one or the other. I'm not all the way science or all the way spiritual. I'm working on being the bridge, and I think, yeah, just understanding more about these concepts and doing that work to really understand how we operate in a state of spirit versus a state of physicality, and how we, again, ourselves, each individual, become a bridge between spirit and physical, between the wave and particle state. We want to learn about that bridging process. We want to learn about that quantum nature of reality so that we can have the best impact on physical reality. Because again, ultimately, we're just here learning. We're here learning about that. We're here learning about the creation process. We're learning about what creates physical reality and how we can shift that. So I hope this has inspired you to learn a little bit more, to do more practice, to get yourself into that wave state, to get yourself into that state where you can really connect cleanly, to the quantum field and tap into the potentialities that exist and tap into the light that comes into physical form. So if you want to learn more about that and various practices involved in that, check out the Star Family Wisdom site. We've got a lot of beginners tools and some intermediate initiatory processes that will help you start to work in spiritual practice and ceremonial practice, using meditation journeys that help you access that state of spirit where you can then start to affect the physical. And again, this is, a practice. This is something we learn over time. It is something that we come into in our own time. So know that it can be complex, but it can also be simplified. And meditation is the place to start. If you're not sure where to start, just learning how to quiet the mind and clearing, the heavier, dense energies we've taken on. That's going to prevent us from, getting into that state of oneness if we're still carrying a lot of that. So the healing work always is complementary to these understandings, these sorts of concepts that we just talked about today. It is foundational to be able to then move into these higher states of being and these higher spiritual practices that help you really start to take control of your physical reality. And you can always reach out to me if you have questions. Reach out to support@starfamilywisdom.com, and you can find us on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram as well. And I'm just so glad that you're here and that we get to have these conversations. If you have questions about this or want some more specific examples, leave some comments below, and we'll keep talking about these concepts. I'm currently thinking about how to take some of these concepts and everything I've learned and everything I've experienced and break it down into some more actionable courses that may be supportive for people. But again, you've got a lot of really great material to get started with on the Star Family Wisdom site. Okay, with that, we'll wrap up for today. I wish you the best beginning of February and the end of winter. We're still in our winter season where we turn inward and we do a lot of these sorts of reflections and we really gestate our dreams and our ideas for what is to come. We release, what happened last year, and we hibernate a little more. And I really love just thinking about the seasons in relation to the cycle of life, in relation to the flow of energy, and how we can understand how to honor the seasons and be in that state. So that's one reason why we did an audio only episode today. I'm still in my hibernation winter state right now, which we'll be coming out of soon. So I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.